Just gonna give it another minute or two more, and then I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. There may be pauses when I let more people in to the Zoom, but I'll go ahead and get started. So today we're talking about what a forest management plan is and the components in a forest management plan. And we'll also talk about why you might want a forest management plan. So of course, before we get started, just a quick thing about what Women Owning Woodland is. So our program that is being developed to provide learning opportunities for women landowners and woodland enthusiasts. We organize field days, lunch and learns, classes geared towards women landowners. And then also a Facebook page that is there to provide resources and opportunities to connect with other women landowners if you're interested, or woodland enthusiasts. Quick upcoming event plug, so I don't forget at the end. October 2nd is the chestnut roast at the Horticulture and Agroforestry Research Center. And so it's more than just chestnuts, but there's like some tours of the farm. They have a pawpaw patch that they'll talk about, elderberries. They will also be roasting chestnuts for sampling, and some other like cooking demonstrations as well. So usually it's a really great event. It is from 10 to 3. And that is at the Horticulture and Agroforestry Research Center, which is there in New Franklin, so kind of close to Boonville, if you're in that part of the world. Another upcoming event that's at one of our research farms is Black Walnut Day. So at the Southwest Center, they are going to be talking about a lot. It's kind of aimed towards commercial production of black walnuts, but they have a new tool that collects black walnuts. It's a machine, so they're going to demonstrate that. And talk about improved varieties of black walnut and why you'd want to plant those. And that's at Southwest Center, which is in Mount Vernon, so down in the southwest corner. It is off I-44, about probably 20-ish, 25 miles past Springfield towards Joplin on I-44. So it is down there in that southwest corner. And that event runs from 1 to 5 on October 7th. And then for kind of our South Central folks, Producer Day is being held at the Wordak Research Farm on October 8th. And this is another free event. No registration for any of these that I've listed. But it is Producer Day. They give a tour of the farm, talk about some of the ongoing research projects. The Producer Day at Wordak is kind of a mix of forestry and livestock production. So they often, at that research farm, we have a herd of cattle that are maintained. There's about 300 acres of open pasture and then 900 acres of woods. So I'm pretty sure at this Producer Day, they usually do talk about some of the forage systems they have in place for the livestock, but then they'll also talk about the forestry side, and in particular, like the recent timber sale that we've had there. So and that one comes with a free lunch, so always a good time. And then October 15th, this is actually the only one that's up and running for registration right now. There will be a Woodland Steward Chainsaw Safety Program we're holding this at Southwest Center. It's not specifically for women, it's for mixed group, but of course I will be there, and so it should hopefully be a really interesting and informative time. And our hope as of right now is that each participant will get to try out a chainsaw and cut down a tree while they're there. So that's our plan right now. We're still kind of waiting for some last minute stuff from our safety folks to make sure we can do all of that. And then October 26th, 27th, and 28th will be a Food Plots for Wildlife program. I do this one in conjunction with an agronomist, and Carly, who's actually on here, she'll also be joining us from the National Deer Association to talk about what we can do for if we're considering food plots and how we use those for wildlife. So busy fall coming up. And then I will also have the October Wild Lunch and Learns up here in the next day or so for registration. So those are coming up. And then I know I didn't put on here because the registration's not open either, but November 5th and 6th, November 5th, we will be doing the same Woodland Steward Chainsaw Safety Program, but we'll be doing it at the Wordak Farm, which is south of St. James. And then actually the next day on November 6th, we will be doing a Walk in the Woods program at Wordak, where we'll cover, so that will be a face-to-face field day, and we'll give some tours of some of the current management practices going on out at the farm, as well as talk a little bit about wildlife. So again, busy fall like always, but that's just a little bit of the upcoming stuff. So without further ado, I'll talk about management plans. So what is a management plan? And there's different names that we use. So we have forest management plans. We sometimes refer to them as forest stewardship plans. Sometimes if they are done by an agency that does a little more focus on open grassland, they won't have the term forest. They'll just be land management plans, or conservation stewardship plans is another one that comes from NRCS. But whatever type of plan it is, stewardship management, it is a document that is written by a forester. In the case of forest management plans, that provides clear information on current forest conditions and the plans we have to improve the forest conditions to meet the objectives of the landowner. So these are always written with the needs and wants of the landowner in mind, and that is what they should meet those objectives, and whatever plans they give you should be intended to meet your needs and or wants for your property. Why would you want one? So first off, management plans are a document that gives you a really clear path and gives you very clear details on what you have on your property. So the first piece of it is always an inventory. So this gives you trees, trees per acre, species that are there, how much, how many board feet, is it marketable, is there decline? So it gives you information if there's like evidence of tree decline. And so it's very important that you know what you have in order to manage it and to meet your objectives. The second part of it is that it gives you direction on what you want to do to meet your objectives that you have for your property. And thinking about your objectives, these are different landowner to landowner. I can tell you that a lot of the common objectives are improve habitat for wildlife. And other ones are, that want to improve like forest health and perhaps want to have timber production. So those are some of the more common ones, but objectives, of course, are very personal, and you can, they are up to you to decide. Another big reason to have a management plan is most cost share programs require a management plan in place before you qualify for cost share. And that's because before they, provide funding for a project on your property, they want to, make sure that it's part of a plan and that it is something that's going to, again, improve habitat or timber or forest health before they provide that. And I would say cost share is probably one of the number one reasons that landowners start to investigate management plans, because that there can be a lot of high costs associated with forest management, and cost share helps, and management plans are one of the steps to get that. What are objectives? And I touched on these just a little bit, but these are, they really can be anything depending on what you see and what you use your property for. Again, common objectives are wildlife habitat improvement, timber production, and forest health. They can, oftentimes what's good for timber production is also actually good for wildlife habitat improvement. So they often, you can have more than one objective, and they oftentimes the same practices would be put in place to do both. Objectives are flexible and really are what you want for your property. So it can include, other things as far as recreation. I had a landowner once that used their property for photography, so they were very focused on having aesthetically pleasing woods, and so we kind of thought about that with some of their management objectives. And so they really are, what you want for your property. I will say the most common ones, again, are always wildlife, timber, and forest health. How do you get a management plan? There are some different ways to go about this. So you can contact the Missouri Department of Conservation Forester. And if you are perhaps not, perhaps your property is less wooded and more grasslands, you can also contact Missouri Department of Conservation private lands conservationists. And so they have two kind of private lands positions right now. So they have private lands conservationists and private lands foresters. So if it's more forested, I'd start with the forester. If it's more grasslands, perhaps that you're interested, I'd go with the private lands conservationist, and they can help you get started. And oftentimes they will actually help you with the writing of the plan. And in some cases, they will write the plan for you themselves. In some other cases, depending what county you're in, they will actually provide the funding to pay a private consulting forester to write the plan for you. So it just kind of depends what county and who's in charge, how they go about that. In some cases, there can be a long list for an MDC conservation forest management plan. So you may have to wait a little bit because they are pretty much in high demand. So if you do not want to wait and you perhaps have an interest in working with a private forester, you can contact a consulting forester. MissouriForesters.com is the Missouri Consulting Forester Association webpage, and you can search this by region and by services, and this will give you a list of private foresters that are available. The downfall to directly contacting your consulting forester is that they do have a fee because they are private businesses. And so there's generally a fee that goes with that. Usually they will quote you based on a dollar amount per acre to write a management plan. And this is sometimes a good place to start if you think you're going to have one. If you're really looking at long-term forest management, it's sometimes good to have a relationship with a consulting forester from the beginning. If you think you're going to have a timber sale, consulting foresters, pretty much all of them that write management plans also have an interest in marketing timber sales. And so it might start that relationship. If you think that you are going to want/need a timber sale down the road, you might be able to start that management plan, and then they can transition into helping you with your timber sale. And again, they're good to be there because they do serve a purpose as far as filling in those gaps that our agencies can't always fill. The third method is to contact an NRCS forester. There are much fewer NRCS foresters in the state of Missouri, so they cover a fairly large region. They oftentimes do not write management plans themselves, but they will provide cost share to help you find a contractor. So back to those consulting foresters, if you do go through NRCS cost share, it does have to be a consulting forester that also qualifies as a technical service provider to write your management plan. And this is, again, just kind of just one more way to get that management plan written. Writing the plan itself. So the forester, whether it's an MDC forester or private forester, they'll meet with you to discuss objectives. They'll kind of usually bring maps with them of your property with the aerial photos, and they will want to discuss like what your goals are, long-term and short-term, which objectives that you have. Do you use your property for a lot of hunting? Are you more interested in the timber aspect. And they're gonna, want to learn about what you want on the property and get as much history and information about the property as possible. This is a good time to talk about just if there's unique characteristics to the property, such as the cave, previous management practices. So like if, this unfortunately happens too often in places, is that, everything was harvested right before I bought it. And, a lot of folks will cut all the timber and then sell the property. So those things can help with making the plan and deciding what the best practices are to meet your objectives. After they've met with you, they'll utilize those aerial photos and topographic maps, and they'll make what we call a forest stand map. And this takes your property and breaks it into smaller pieces. And so it maps it into smaller, more manageable chunks. So it's pretty overwhelming to think about like doing TSI on 100 acres all at one time. So any of our management practices would be very overwhelming if we said like, let's do them on the whole property. So breaking them into these smaller chunks, again, makes it more manageable. But it also is important because even on, I live in southern Missouri. Even in southern Missouri, different parts of the land have different characteristics that affects the way trees grow, what species of trees grow there. And so these chunks are based on things like soil type aspect. So a north-facing slope grows more white oak. It holds more moisture, so it tends to have more white oak. Larger trees grow on that side. And then a south-facing slope tends to be hotter and drier, and we find a lot more black oak or red oak on this side. They don't tend to grow as large. And so based on those things, that also goes into consideration when determining stands. Also, generally from the aerial photo, while we can't say like, oh, these are all white oak or these are all red oak, we can see where things like pine are or cedar, and these can also be taken into account when we divide our property into stands. After that, stand map is made, then the forest will usually hit the ground to do the inventory. And at this time, they'll take notes about the trees and any other resources on the property. Inside those stands, which the stand map was on that last slide, they'll disperse what we call inventory plots. And so our general rule is that there'll be like one inventory plot for every 3 acres of the stand, but with no fewer than 3 inventory plots per stand. That seems to be the general kind of rule of thumb that we use. And so an inventory plot gets put in, and these are usually done on a variable plot. So there's a tool called a prism, and it is used at Plot Center, and it kind of determines if trees are in, and then it can be extrapolated very easily into how many like trees per acre we have of certain sizes that we measured. And so it's kind of collecting like a little bit of data, and then that gets extrapolated into the whole stand. But we want to make sure we do 3 plots at a minimum so that we do catch all the diversity that we might have within a stand. And then this inventorying can take a couple days depending on the size of the property. At the same time, they're also going to take notes if they see any invasive species, what's in the understory. Is there a lot of oak regeneration, or is there no oak regeneration at all? Is there evidence of wildlife? What type of wildlife might be there? If they find anything else of historical or cultural interest, those things get noted and mapped out. So pretty much during this time, they'll walk the entirety of the property, putting in their plots. And then this gets put, again, all this data gets put into the software, and then it'll extrapolate the data for the whole stand, and they'll get back information like trees per acre, what the size classes are, the species that are present, how many board feet of marketable or saleable timber is there, So lots of different information from that, in addition to their notes of things that maybe don't show up in an inventory plot, but are noted along the way. After they've completed the fieldwork, they'll bring all that data back to the office along with their notes and run the reports to put in the plan. And they'll write out those observations they made. This includes, again, things like aspects and condition and invasive species, understory, regeneration, any cultural information that was there. So all that gets put back into this plan. And after they review all the data that comes back, particularly on tree sizes, numbers, and species, they'll use that information to put together management recommendations. So for example, if we had a stand that came back with the majority of my trees being in what I would consider the mature class, so we have an entire stand of perhaps quite large old trees, then my recommendation might be to have a timber sale to develop, to remove some of those older trees to make sure that I get the marketable timber before it dies, but also to open that canopy up to start some regeneration for my next forest. It might include forest stand improvement. So perhaps my timber overall is not large enough for me to have a timber sale, but perhaps if I thin it, this is going to help with my forest health and my timber production long term. So a forest stand improvement to thin it. A lot of other ones that pop up, I don't know that I've hardly written a single plan in my career that did not include some aspect of invasive species management as a prescription. So like removal of things like autumn olive or multiflora rose. Another common practice that gets prescribed fairly often is prescribed fire. So this can help, again, with regeneration of our forest. So this oftentimes can kind of open up places in the forest floor and allow for tree regeneration. So, and there's other practices that pop up. These are pretty much the most common recommendations that come back. Then all the data, all the stand descriptions, soils information and data, stand maps, prescriptions, and cultural data are all put into one document, which is the management plan. This document gets presented to you and your forester will review that information with you. So oftentimes if this is an MDC forester, they'll sit down and go through it pretty much page by page and prescription by prescription and talk about each stand with you. Same with a consulting forester. If it's a contract, so if MDC paid like a consulting forester to write it, oftentimes they'll invite the consulting forester and then they'll also be there to go through that plan with you, because oftentimes even when they contract out the management plan, that MDC forester though is going to be the one that helps you going forward to implement any of those practices. So oftentimes this is the part we get to is I have a plan, now what? One of the best parts and probably most utilized parts of management plans that are written in Missouri, and I will tell you that MDC and NRCS, the plan template, they have put together a plan template that is the same. So if it's an MDC forester, an NRCS forester, and oftentimes a consulting forester, it is the same template that they use across the board. And they agreed upon this because it was easy for cost share purposes. So sometimes you might have an MDC forester that wrote your management plan, but perhaps the cost share you need comes from NRCS, so the federal government. So they have written this template so that the plans are the same regardless. So this helps a lot with the cost share practices. And so in this particular template there, and in any management plan, whether it uses this template or not, there should be a schedule of prescriptions and recommendations. And this is a good place to start. So this is usually organized where it gives you kind of the prescription, what's recommended, and then it gives a timeline oftentimes. So like a year that you should shoot for completing that recommendation. So these often include things like maintaining boundaries, and this is actually an annual recommendation that's pretty much in all management plans, that you should check your property boundaries every year to make sure that they are marked and clearly seen. Monitoring forest health, another one that we recommend kind of on an annual basis. And then additionally, there's things like, your timber sales, your TSI. Your management plan should be reviewed at the 5-year mark with your forester to evaluate progress in implementation. And some landowners get nervous about this because perhaps they didn't make as much progress on their management plan as it called for. All foresters are just happy to see that there's any forward motion oftentimes. And we do understand that sometimes these plans, particularly if it's a property that's not had any management for a long time, so maybe it has a long list of things that need to be done, and that can be overwhelming, and it can be expensive with or without cost share. So without cost share, it especially can be expensive to do some of those management projects. And with cost share, it can still be perhaps not expensive as far as cost, but it can be expensive as far as time that it takes to implement those projects. And so any forward motion is good. We're always happy to see that. So you should not be hesitant to meet with your forester at that 5-year mark, because they're just happy to see any progress. Every 10 years, a plan should be updated and the forest inventory redone. And this is because practices will have happened. So if we had a TSI, perhaps that was prescribed in year 2. By year 10, we should be able to start seeing the effects of that TSI. So that's always good to note. But also trees grow and trees die. So that does change inventories. And so redoing it every 10 years will keep us with the most current data and continue to guide those practices and objectives that we're trying to meet, can help us with that. So, and then forest management improves forest health. So that's kind of, I hear all the time, like, I'm just letting it grow. It should be healthy. I'm just letting it grow. Well, humans have been managing and aiding forest growth for tens of thousands of years. And so we shouldn't be afraid to implement some of those management practices, because overall it is going to help with forest health. And that's really our bottom line and goal with forest management practices. So, and I got through in a half an hour, but if there's any questions about management plans, we're at that part of today's Lunch and Learn.
I have a question. I have a plan, and what if your objectives change and you wanted to see somebody before the 5 years or
Yeah, so if you did your management plan with like an MDC forester, they would be happy to see you before, I'm sure, the 5-year mark, especially if that plan perhaps needs to be tweaked to meet your objectives more. They can probably still use a lot of your data, especially if it's less than 5 years old, and kind of tweak it to meet those new objectives. Yep. So, and I should say that you shouldn't hesitate to contact your whether it's a consulting forester or MDC forester or NRCS forester, or we actually, and I should start including them, there are some National Wild Turkey Federation foresters. There's 3 of them in Missouri. So whoever you're working with, you shouldn't be afraid to contact them, even in, it's not perhaps on the schedule to see them, if you have questions about implementation. So because we have different prescriptions, sometimes we do them ourselves, sometimes we use contractors. So if you have questions about anything, you should always contact them. So, and I will put out there that MDC has kind of reorganized in the last couple of years. And so your forester may have changed depending where you are, because some of the foresters ended up being So all our foresters used to be kind of a mix of private lands and public land foresters, and they have since kind of divided them. And so some of the foresters strictly manage conservation lands, and then the other foresters are private lands foresters, and they work strictly with private landowners. So there has been a little bit of kind of finagling of who works with who. So your forester may have changed if it was
Yeah,
a forester.
mine did change, so I
Okay.
wondered if that was going to be hard to get in to see him, or just give him a call, I guess.
I'd say just give them a call. We are coming up on a little bit of a busy time because with the chronic wasting disease testing, it's kind of like all hands on deck. So they also do get busy this time of year helping with some of that. But I'd send an email or give a call and at least get on his calendar or her calendar.
Thank you.
Yep. Say, Marcia, you're in Phelps County, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So you're.
That was Mike, so it's somebody different now. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Shane Botard is yours now.
What was the last name?
Botard, Botard. And he's actually out of the Houston office.
Okay.
Yep. But I know that he is pretty excited about working with private landowners. So there's a good chance that he'll get back with you pretty fast and try to meet with you at least pretty quickly. Any other questions today? Like I said, kind of the number one reason to do this is to help with cost share, because just about every cost share practice requires a plan being in place for natural resources cost shares.
Well, for example, I would say 1 acre of my land could be a glade. And my management plan is like, go cut all the cedar. So that's what I'm working on, right? And so,
yes,
the next step, I don't know if cost share would even cover like seeds or anything like that. That would be the main,
There is some cost share for sometimes like for pollinator habitat establishment that might work in that place, in that position.
Okay.
Yep. Any other management plan questions today?
Sarah, I have a question, and I don't know if you can answer this, but we have a grant with the USDA, and some of it includes terrace work.
Mm-hmm.
And the initial plan they have on there, they have like drain tile running right through the middle of a grove of trees. And I didn't know if there was really much we can do to change that. They still have to come out and survey the land.
Okay.
Before it's all done.
I was gonna say, is your plan with like a soil and water technician or a NRCS conservationist?
Yeah, I believe it's NRCS.
Like I forget what they call their folks. Have they been out to see where those tiles are supposed to go, or was it done just mainly from like a aerial photo map?
Right now, it's just been done by an aerial. Okay. But once the beans are out, then they'll come out and survey it, supposedly, and get a better plan for the dirt work to happen.
Okay. So I think that they would probably, because you probably don't want to remove your trees to put the tiles in, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, I think when they come out kind of giving that concern, they might be able to refigure that. I don't know without seeing it, but they're usually pretty, as long as objectives are met, they're usually pretty flexible.
Okay.
Yeah. So communication, just like everything else, is usually a good, they're usually pretty willing to work and talk about objectives and wants. So, and I tell landowners, it's your property. So, sometimes people get plans back and it has projects that they, perhaps don't have the time nor the energy to get done, or they have no desire to do it, and that's okay. Working on other things is, keep a good relationship with your forester, but if you work on other things, but maybe not, there's one thing that you don't like, that's okay.
Yeah, we thought that would happen with because it is cost shared with the government, but it was an all or nothing. Either we did all of the things that they recommended or we do none of it and wait till next year to reapply.
Okay. So, and the tiles are part of the all?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, hopefully they'll be able to kind of see where it runs and maybe find another solution. I can't guarantee they will, but they also probably have calculated in the amount of removing trees to put those tiles in, hopefully with the cost share.
You would think so, but in that same aisle where the trees are, we're doing forest stand improvement in that area. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not very familiar with the terrace and tile process, so maybe it won't need as much space as it seems like. So maybe it'll have just a minimal effect on the trees.
Maybe. We'll see.
I was gonna say I'm familiar with the practice, but I don't know much about the technical details. So keep us updated and let us know how it goes.
I will.
Any other questions? And I really appreciate those of you with plans kind of sharing what you've been doing and things that you've also found, because not everything is always a smooth process. So it's good to hear real life experiences about that.
I guess when I had the plan, this is Marcia again, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with everything. And I just wanted to know what's the best thing to do. And now that I've learned a whole lot more, I have more ideas. And that's why I may want a newer opinion on what I can do. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I think they totally understand about objectives changing as you go and learn more about it. And sometimes, if you buy a property and you go for the management plan right away, you haven't really got to know your property at the time. And so that does change ideas and thoughts for the future. Any other questions today? Next, Carly, I'm on the spot since you're here. Next week, Carly Dawson will be presenting on deer and deer management. So she's with the National Deer Association. So you get a break from hearing me talk for the lunch hour next week. So she'll be doing next week's presentation. All right. Well, I hope everybody's enjoying the first day of fall. The weather here in Missouri turned a little bit, which was nice. Make it feel like fall. All right. I will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.